Hello again everyone, hope everybody's doing well. Welcome back to another Decode Tech video. So in this video we're going to be talking about code editors. So far we've used idle for our code editor, and that comes along pre-installed with Python. And that works well for most cases for, just little scripts, just testing things out. But I wanted to introduce some more feature-rich editors that are a lot nicer to work with and will help me explain some of these programming concepts a little bit better. So among programmers, code editors are a pretty big deal. Some people can be pretty attached to their specific code editor and be like, oh, you have to use this code editor. So I'm not going to be pushing this code editor on you today. If you want to use whatever your favorite one is, that's fine. There's many others out there. The one I'm showing you today is a very popular one. It is growing very rapidly, and it's been a very good one in my experience. Now there's a seemingly endless amount of styles and feature-filled ones to choose from. So it can be a little bit tricky to know which one to go for, but it's nice to pick one that is flexible and can work on different operating systems, can work with your language specifically, because that's a kind of a big deal that you can actually edit your code in it. So there are like 3 tiers of code editors in my opinion. The first one is like a glorified code editor, like Notepad++ is a really popular one. That one's pretty nice, but it doesn't have a lot of these features I'm going to be talking about. There's like full-blown code, what are called IDEs, or that stands for Integrated Development Environment. These have everything from code highlighting to code formatting to debugging tools to source control, which we'll get into later. And generally they're specific to certain languages, not always, but oftentimes they are. And so they have all kinds of stuff for your programming language. Then there are what I call the kind of in-between a glorified source code editor and an IDE. So these still might have some rich features that these IDEs have, like a debugger and maybe some other plugins or extensions you can put on, but they're not quite as limited as just a source code editor. So what are some of the upsides and downsides? Well, IDEs are very large programs generally, and they take up a good bit of resources, like RAM for instance. So if you have kind of a lower powered computer, it might struggle to run an IDE. Also, another thing with IDEs is it can be quite a chore to configure them to your liking or to your needs. And so that can be another reason why you might not want to use an IDE. But that being said, they can be very helpful, and sometimes they're mandatory in certain jobs because whoever started the project used that IDE, and now everything is, like the name implies, integrated into that development environment. So the code editor I'm going to be showing today is called VS Code, which stands for Visual Studio Code. And this is one of those in-between programs. It's not quite a full-blown IDE, but it's more than just a source code editor, I would say. You can add what are called extensions and really make it fit your needs, and they generally work really well and aren't too hard to configure. So to install VS Code, you can just type in VS Code into a browser and it should come right up. Now VS Code is developed by Microsoft, but they've done something different and they've made it open source, which means a lot of people can contribute to it, and it really is nice when people open source a project. The other thing I like about it is it's cross-platform, which means there's a version of it for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So if you're used to using Windows but a job requires you to use a Mac or vice versa, or you want to work with Linux, it'll work on any of those and it'll feel the same in all those environments, which is really nice. And unlike most IDEs, it's a pretty lightweight editor, so that makes it really nice for being able to run on many different machines. So let's go ahead and get to the download, and then I'll show you more of the features I like specifically about VS Code. So here we are at the browser, and I'm just going to type in VS Code. And this is not to be confused with just plain Visual Studio, which is pretty much a full-blown IDE that Microsoft also makes, but VS Code is the lightweight editor. So we want VS Code. And here in the top listing in Google, I'm just going to click on this, and it should have a recommendation for your operating system auto-detected. Mine says download for Windows here, so I'm just going to click on that. And here my download has started down in the left corner, and here it brings you to a web page that tells you a little bit how to get started. So once your download completes, you're just going to want to run your setup. You might have to go into your computer's download folder, or if you can find your downloaded file in your web browser. Once you have the installer, you can just hit next. You need to accept the license as normal. Here it tells you the path to where it's going to download Visual Studio. Hit next, and next again. And here you can select if you want a desktop shortcut, and Also, here's an Add Open with Code action to Windows Explorer and File context menu. That can be nice if you want to just right-click a file and hit Open with Code. So I might go ahead and check those options. You'll also probably want to add to path. That'll only be available after you restart your computer, but then in the command prompt, you could type code and it'll launch the code editor from the command prompt. And I'm also going to want to register code as an editor for supported file types. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next and install. And of course it'll go ahead and do its thing. And so I might just speed this up so you don't have to sit here and wait through the whole thing. Alright, once it's done you can hit finish and it should launch Visual Studio for you. And it might redirect you to a web page to try to show you how to get started. I'm just going to exit out of my window. So here we are in VS Code. I'm just going to make this big screen so you can see better. And here's a little welcome screen. Now one of the features I like about it is it has tabs up here in the top left corner. I'm going to exit out of the welcome tab and now we just have a blank screen with a couple commands down here. Now getting used to navigating this might look a little daunting at first, but it's really not that bad. In the top left side, we have a couple icons going down. And the top one is a file browser. The next one down is just a search. The next one down is for that source control I talked briefly about. We'll get into that later. Next one down is for debugging options. Now debugging is like troubleshooting your code. And the reason it's called debugging is back in the day, they used paper with punch holes to write computer programs to stand for ones and zeros, whether a hole's punched or not. Well, one time one of these programs didn't run because an actual literal bug got on the tape and messed it up. And so ever since then, they've called problems in programs bugs. And we'll look more about debugging in a little bit. And then the very bottom one is extensions. And this is what really gives your editor power. You can install certain extensions to allow you to do different stuff with this editor, and it can be really helpful. So the very first thing we want to do is click on this extensions and search for the Python extension. Now we'll actually see that it shows some popular ones down here and Python is already there. But I'm just going to type in Python, and you want the one that has like 44 million downloads or whatever it is. This is one of the most popular extensions in VS Code, making it one of the leading Python code editors. And then you're just going to want to hit install. That'll go ahead if you have an internet connection and just install that for you. Now that'll give us some features for debugging our code and some various other things that are very nice to have. Now we want to open a folder to work in. So I'm going to go up to the top folder, hit that, and you see there's an open folder button here. You can also do some options up here at the top, like file, open folder, but this button should work just fine. Now once you have a folder open, I'm going to go under my Python tutorials and just hit select folder. Now it should blink and kind of reload for you, and once it does that, we'll be ready to go. Alright, now you see I already have some files in this folder. Now up here at Python tutorials, this is my folder. If I click the little arrow, that opens my folder up and shows me the files inside it. If I click the arrow again, it closes the folder. So it's kind of like a little file explorer right inside your code editor. You can also add files, folders, and various other things right here from VS Code. So I'm just going to add a new file, and I'm going to name it test.py. So it knows it's a Python file, and hit enter. Now you notice it opened up a tab up here called test.py, and it gives me line 1 of my file. The welcome message is back up here because we installed the Python extension, and so it reloaded, and so I'm just gonna uncheck the show the welcome page on startup. That way it doesn't show every time, and I'm just gonna exit out of that tab. So these tabs are really nice features to be able to switch through multiple files. It'll be really nice, especially for me helping you with these tutorials, but also later on we'll look into other Python features that will really take advantage of this tabbed view. So in this tab, you see the name of our file right at the top, test.py. And you'll see down in the right corner here, I get a pop-up saying linter pylint is not installed. So what linting is in Python is there's a specific format that there's a convention people want your code in, which means we want so many spaces between this and so many spaces between this and various other style formats that they like everybody to follow. And there's linters they have that will find problems with your code as you're working on it and tell you how to fix it. And so it's saying, well, you don't have this linter installed, we recommend you install it. But just for now, I'm going to say do not show again. or actually I'll just exit out because I might want it to show again sometime. But for now, we're just going to ignore that part. And by the way, you do want to open a folder, because if you don't open a folder and just start a file, it might not run your code right away because it likes to have a folder to work in. So I'm just going to type print and the string, this is a test, to make sure it's working. Now to run your code, you can either go to the debug and start debugging, or you see F5 as a shortcut to run your code. The other option is you can click on the debug tab and hit start. Now it's going to pop up and say you need a configuration to debug this file. So I'm just going to click on Python file, and now you see down here in the terminal it prints out some interesting looking stuff here, but just ignore that for now, and right underneath this blue text our string this is a test prints out right inside VS Code. This is nice because normally with idle, when you run the file, it takes you into a separate shell to give you the output, whereas this is all right here in the same window. Okay, so now we know it's working. Now some other interesting things to note is down here in the bottom left corner you have your Python interpreter that it's currently using, and you can select different interpreters. You could select the Python 2 interpreter if you have that installed, but just note that if we ran this code with the Python 2 interpreter, it wouldn't work, so I'm going to leave it at the Python 3. It should automatically detect your Python interpreter. Sometimes it might not. If not, you can manually set it, but it should auto-detect it. Okay, so another thing to note, if we go back to our files, you'll see there's a .vs code folder inside our Python tutorials folder now, or whatever folder you're currently in. And in that is a launch.json file. If you click on that, that is some settings for your current workspace. There's also a master settings for all your workspaces, and you can click on the settings icon down here in the bottom left corner and click on settings, and now you can just search for different settings, and there's many different ones you can tweak, font size and various other things. But just notice if you change the settings for your specific workspace that you're in now, won't necessarily affect every workspace you have. So if you want whatever change you're going to make to affect everything, you need to go into the global settings, which you can do down here under settings. Also, in this menu here, the command palette is a very important thing of VS Code. You can do many different things with this, and you can start typing and it will suggest things, and so oftentimes you'll need to use that command palette. So we can also view other files in this folder by clicking on them. Notice when I click on them just once, the text up here at the tab is in italics. That means it's just for viewing. So if I click on another file, it'll delete that tab and update it with a new one. If I actually want it to stay up there, I can click it again or double click it, and now the text will become unitalics and it'll stay there even when I click on a new file. So that is really a good thing to note. It frustrated me at first when I tried to open multiple tabs and they kept just replacing it with a different one. Okay, so that's going to pretty much do it for this video on VS Code and this introduction to different code editors. I'm not going to look into other code editors in this series. This is the one I'm going to be using, but feel free to go search for your own if you don't like this one. But they can be very useful, and you'll see as we go on this series, I'll keep showing more and more features of this editor that are really handy. Alright, hope you found this informative. If you have any questions on anything, just leave it down in the comments down below and I'll try to help you. Please share the video with anybody that might find this interesting. Consider giving it a thumbs up, and hope to see you all in the next Python video.